Welcome to Marathon Champions, the podcast where running legends Benji Durden, Bill Rogers, and Ron Tabb share their timeless wisdom on marathon training and inspire listeners with their wealth of experience. These champions continue to impact the running world today. Now, let's pass the mic to your MC, Letty Lundquist, to kick off this journey of enduring inspiration.
You started Bloomsday decades ago.
I did.
Talk about that.
Well, I had been invited down to the Peachtree Road Race before the '76 Olympics, and it was the first time I had been in an event like that. Which now I guess you'd say they're pretty common everywhere around the world, but at the time, an event that went through the heart of the city and had elite level runners, Olympic caliber runners, but then just a lot of people that were out for health and fitness. That was a new concept, and I was just bowled over by it. I said, "This is a great thing," and so when I got back to Spokane after the Olympics, and I had some notoriety then for having run well in the marathon, and there were starting to be some small, fun runs that were organized by the Heart Association, maybe 150 runners, that kind of thing. And a reporter from our local newspaper came to one of them and that I went to, and she said, "What do you think of all this interest in your sport of running?" All that interest was about 150 people at that point. But I did say, I think it's great. And I said, I think we should have a run like this in Spokane, and it's be a great way to get people involved. And we had a World's Fair here 2 years earlier, and totally renovated the downtown, had a new park and all this great stuff. So it was, and so she did put an article in the paper and said something like Olympian said Spokane should have a big road race or something, like that. And then people came to me and said, let's do this. And the local JCs adopted it as a project, and we got a sponsor with a medical insurance company, and things started rolling. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was still teaching school, and I wasn't in the middle of the organization, but I was certainly involved. And so we got to our first Bloomsday in May of 1977, and had 1,200 finishers. I go, wow, that's a lot of people. And it was funny. My roommate at the time was a pretty good runner from Whitworth, and he saw me doing some part of the organization for this thing before the race, and he said, "You're going to be lucky to get 100 people." and he reminded me of that years later, that he had been so far off. But and then the second year we had 5,000, and the third year we had 10. Well, then we were just sitting on top of a volcano, so we just had to try to keep up with the growth for the next 10 years, and figure out how to keep track of everybody and do some sort of timing of everybody. And it was crazy. And of course, it was similar stuff was happening every place else around the country. Although I think at one time, Bloomsday might have been the biggest road race in the world that was timing everybody. But anyway, yeah, so it was the most surprising thing that's happened in my life, is the way it grew the way it did. Now it's just part of the culture here, and we just hope it goes on for forever. And we have, it's hard to keep the elite athlete part of it in these road races, because so much of the energy is among people that aren't that interested in how the elite runners are doing. But we've been able to keep it as part of our event, and an important part of our event, as many other events have, but some don't, and it's kind of too bad. But it's just a great thing we have, and I love the rest. I love the recreational part of it. I love the way it impacts the community, but I also love the speed with which people can run those hills that Bill mentioned before, because it's not an easy course.
But it's a fun course, and I think part of it is that these races were so much fun, Don. You know, Peachtree and Bloomsday and all the races that were cranking up at the time. And I think it was that feeling is still there. It's just more and more and more people, which is great, because that's one of the best things that ever came out of the sport, is that people have better lives, better quality lives, more fun in their lives. And you became the head of the RRCA. And so that's an important organization. They have the school kids program and everything. And I think it's a funny thing, is our sport, in some ways it was overrated, and marathoning was some ways overrating, but the fact that this sport could actually, I think in a lot of ways, change in the country for the
Yeah.
better, you know, and so Bloomsday played that role in that, and the Peachtree played that role in that, and a lot of other races. Some of them are gone, like we had the Freedom Trail here in Boston that was great fun, started by Greater Boston Track Club, but I think the city didn't like it for a while, that we had to close a road down or something. But you did great things there. But I am still mad at you the way you crushed me at that Peachtree Road race. I could never win that race.
Well, I should be able to have at least one victory over you. I'll tell you one thing. You talk about how difficult it is. You have to have a lot of buy-in by your city officials to do this. In our first year, our mayor he grew up in Boston. In fact, his last name was Rogers. And he knew exactly what we were trying to do. Maybe not exactly, but he had grown up watching the Boston Marathon come through his neighborhood. So he was a fan of what we were trying to do from the outset. And we ran into a stickler with the head of the traffic engineer for the city. He did not want to close one of the streets that we really felt we needed to close to get back to the park. So we were kind of at an impasse, and we got a meeting together with the police, the traffic engineer, and the mayor was there. And I got up and talked about how important it was for us to close the street. The traffic engineer got up and said how impossible it was going to be to close that street. And then Mayor Rogers got up and said, I remember growing up in Boston, watching the marathon come through my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I think this would be a great thing for the city. And that meeting was over.
Mm-hmm.
The mayor says what the mayor wants. People listen, and everybody got in line. It was wonderful to have had that happen.
Because you're at many years of history now. Don, you were a leader for the Association of Road Racing Athletes. Benji I know, was a big part of that. And of course that race in Portland, Oregon.
You financed this for a bit of it.
What's that?
You gave us a grant to finance it as we got started.
For the Association of Road Racing Athletes?
Yeah, you gave us a financial grant to help pay for our bills as we were getting started.
I just remember what a day that was. And I know that the two young brothers from the West Coast are working on a documentary about the Cascade runoff. And it seems like it was this critical atomic explosion type event, critical mass type event that changed the sport forever. But I wonder if the younger pros today understand it or know it. And what do you think?
Well, the guy that you mentioned, who's working on a documentary about that race and the impact of it, his father was one of the race organizers back then, and I think I heard correctly that he was pushed around in a stroller back at one of the early races, and he later on became a pretty good collegiate runner. And he said exactly what you said, Bill. He said, he says the younger guys that I'm around, they don't know anything about this, and that kind of motivated him. He said, he says I want to do something to explain how this all happened and how um, paying athletes above the table came into being, and so he's working on it, but it's taken a while. He's done a hell of a lot of interviews, and I can't wait to see what he finally comes up with.
It's been a while. It's been like 2 or 3 years. I
That's about
think
right. Yeah.
I keep commenting every now and then that because of what we did, Michael Jordan got to play in the Olympics.
Well, I don't think that's a stretch either, because
No, it isn't. I mean, before road racers said, okay, we're going to take one, to change the sport, Jordan couldn't have played in the Olympics. He was a professional.
yeah, yeah, I think we had to kind of kick down the door, but once we had done it, then it became possible for other Olympic athletes, like you
Yeah.
say, the dream team. Would that have happened otherwise?
It's
Maybe.
kind of happening like that. Something is happening in NCAA sport with the name, image, likeness, and the open transfers. And I mean, so NCAA sport is the process of who knows where it's going to end. But I see sort of a revolution happening there, kind of like our revolution.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
didn't go exactly where we wanted it to go. We thought we'd have a circuit of races, and we did for a while, but we never ended up having that big purse that we were hoping to have and become like pro tennis.
I think some races, Benji, Don, and Ron refused to get on board, refused to change.
Oh yeah.
I remember, that certain races, maybe that I had even won before, wouldn't invite me back or something. And it was a controversial thing amongst certain races. Look at the BAA and the Boston Marathon. Of course, they were the absolutely last organization that agreed to professional side to the sport. And they had to be dragged kicking and screaming, not till 1986, 5 years later. But New York City Marathon made the move pretty quick. And I remember Mayor Koch said to Fred LeBeau and George Hirsch at the New York Roadrunners Club, well, if we're going to pay those runners, well, then you've got to pay the police that are covering the course,
Oh yeah.
things like that. It was a struggle. And but they made the move, and it was a smart move,
Yeah.
and the sport is bigger and better than ever, and New York is stronger than ever. And Boston has made some great changes and everything. So that's all good to see.
Yeah. I still am involved with the pro circuit. It's sort of the successor to the Aero circuit. It's much smaller, but I can't understand why it's so hard to get events like Bloomsday, like Cherry Blossom, to do something to get together. I mean, it just makes perfect sense to me. You take these classic American road races and put them together into a series, and
I think part of it is we're such a group of individualists.
Yeah,
Even
that's
though
true.
we have run on teams and we are associated with other runners, we are still individualists. We're doing an individual activity, and the people that put on the races are individualists. And yeah, they meet up for conferences, but they got their own thing. And it's, I mean, we do see now with the marathons have kind of joined together, and they have a group,
right,
but
right.
there's also a lot more money in the marathon circuit. I mean, you got entry fees well above $300 for some of these. It's there's money there to do a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that World Marathon Majors is had some success.
Yeah.
And again, getting together and doing things as a unit, even though again everybody has their own event and wants to do things in certain ways. They don't want to be dictated to, and that's fair enough. But it's just kind of frustrating that we haven't gotten even closer to something like golf and tennis with non-marathon distances. we've
Yeah.
got something going, but just
And,
it's
and it's ironic, Don, because I think road racing is really globally, as part of athletics, bigger than golf or tennis. But I
yeah.
think it's the corporate side is tied in with both those sectors, those sports, especially golf, as we all know, but even they are going through some great struggles now with the issues with the
Oh
live
yeah.
tour and everything. And but I think it's an odd thing. Maybe it's just our past history when we were all supposed to be poor. And it's hard to fight against that. And so, but I think I still think this is the number one sport in the world for individuals, and I think soccer is the number one biggest sport in the world for teams. And of
Uh-huh.
course, the World Cup's coming to the US in a year or two. So I think that's going to change our country a lot. We can think about who are the best athletes or who are some athletes more worthy of um, attention. And of course, having World Athletics for the first time ever, the championship in Eugene, Oregon, I think it did do a lot to give our sport visibility, but we need it to happen another time or two.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Mhm.
I loved watching. I didn't go in person. I watched on TV, but had recorded all the sessions, and God, it was just a great competition at down there in Eugene. And
Mhm.
hope we do get it back again, um, because and some of my running or past running buddies said, well, they said, well, there aren't very many people in the stands. I said, are you kidding me? That's a big stadium, so it's not going to look full a lot of the time, but I think they had pretty good crowds, and it went over really well.
Well, I was just at a meet last week in Eugene, and we guys. I mean, I lived there for 6 years, and while I was living there, it was definitely track capital USA. But they had the Oregon preview meet this October, um, just last month, towards the end of March, and the preview meet that I had been to back in the early 80s, the stadium would be sold out. I mean, you're talking 10,000 people at the meet on Saturday. It was a 2-day session. And it was really disappointing and discouraging to see, because I went there for the Friday night session, and there were less than 100 people in the stands.
Oh,
Less than 100 people for the Oregon preview.
wow.
And then the next day, it was much better. And the weather wasn't very nice, but still, when you see the stadium that you're accustomed to seeing with 10,000 people in it, and then you see what it was this year, it's
Uh-huh.
pretty disheartening. So I think that that's what we're seeing, though, is a movement with the athletes are no longer training in Eugene the way they were back in the early 80s. You're seeing, they're in northern Arizona, they're in Colorado, they're most of the distance people are going up to altitude now, as opposed to training like
I think, Ron, weren't there some other major track meets happening around that time? The 10,
Stanford was this past weekend.
So I think it's been diffused a little bit, around the country. But I think Eugene will always be the track capital because of its long, long history, Bowerman, Dillinger, and Nike's influence, which still is extremely strong. But I think our sport is gonna be on the rise because the health and fitness side to our lives is
Well,
key. And our
I
sport is one of the sports that really does something positive for people. We just
well
need
last
changes
week,
there.
this earlier this week, you had a basketball game where there were the highest viewing audience ever for a women's basketball
Yeah.
game. And I think other sports are beginning to gain more recognition. Soccer, for example, in the
Yeah.
for high school kids, I have, coaching high school down here, I have a little problem with, the kids wanting to play soccer and, if they can fit in a track meet or a cross country meet, then they try and fit it in, but they wanted soccer is more important.
Yeah.
And you talk about World Cup coming to the US, here was it 2 years, 2 years that we're going to have the World Cup soccer. I think you're going to see the sport again take our sport take a hit just because there's going to be interest in other sports.
I think you're right in a certain way. Soccer, that we like team sports. We like to have a team
Kids do.
connected
Yeah.
to the city thing. But look at cross country. I've heard some really huge numbers for cross country participation, and that's because the young women coming in high school and collegiate. And I've seen that on ESPN. I don't think cross country was on ESPN back in our day.
No.
It was big, but it was isolated and not considered too important, really. But our sport, I still think, when our country changes and when our healthcare system changes, and I think that's when they'll have this revolution again. Maybe it'll be the second running boom or the third one or something, but it'll really be bigger. But a lot of athletes did come out of soccer. A number of the top women distance runners played soccer in high school. But then where do you go? Well, if you can't be in this little tiny team, and so I think there's a good future, but it is very tough. It seems the sport is bigger than ever in road racing, but it's also hard because American champions, were more visible years ago. And today our sport is dominated by
Foreigners.
a couple of countries, really Ethiopia, Kenya, maybe Uganda. I was watching the World Cross Country Champs last week, which is fantastic. And we did well, but it's an interesting question, I think. How can this sport get visibility if only 3 countries are in the news all the time? I mean, what do you think? Is it just the way it's going to be?
Well, I think if we had, we have like guys, Connor Matz, who's doing well for the US, but back in the 70s and 80s when, you and Don and Frank were dominating, the marathon scene, American kid, because I looked up to you guys. I looked up, I saw Frank win in 72 in Munich, and then in 76 kind of inspired me to make my own career decision to train for the Olympic trials in 1980. That's because for me, it was because, oh, wow, this is really great. We've got these Americans so well at the Olympic level. And, I didn't even think of it from that standpoint. It was like, wow, look at this. We've got a guy just won the marathon at the Olympics. He just got a silver medal in the marathon at the Olympics. Now you've had Meb up there and you've had Galen Rupp up there, but the numbers are fewer and far between. Now we don't have those numbers like we did back in the 70s and 80s, which I think that's when we were in the middle of a running boom. We have more numbers participating today, but I don't think we have the visibility that we did back, like we did in the 70s and 80s.
And
That's just my observation.
Some of the Americans are running are just phenomenal.
Oh, they are, absolutely.
And it's almost like they're not giving
we don't have one American male in the top 100 in the world, marathon time wise.
Our top American is listed as
67th or
no. Well, if you go down the Road to Paris list, where the list, give each country 3.
right.
Our best American is 59th.
59 now, yeah. But time wise,
I mean, he's a lot further down than that. If you hang on a second, you guys talk for a minute, and I'll tell you what his actual place is.
Yeah, but I think if we had if we had an American running, 201 or 2 flat, I think it would draw greater interest for our sport than where we are today.
Sure, absolutely.
But
But when we're, fastest guy is what, 206, or no, not even that, 208,
207.50, I
207,
think it
yeah,
is.
207. You know, not too many high school kids, and I coach a lot of high school kids. So, they don't even recognize, they can't identify with, with what's going on in our sport because they don't, we're not visible, at a high
Yet,
level.
yet our high school runners are phenomenal.
Oh,
Our young
absolutely.
people
I mean,
are phenomenal. The
So
coaches,
Connor Mance
had-
is 413th in the men's marathon.
it's, yeah, I mean, it's hard to get behind. If you're a high school kid, it's pretty hard to get behind a guy that's not even ranked in the top 100 in the world
He's
time wise.
Oh, actually, I take that back. Overall ranking, he's 413th. He's 70th in the marathon. He's 47th in the 10,000, and he's 119th in road racing.
Yeah. Well, Benji, you and Don and Bill and I, we were all pretty successful with our careers, and we were visible. Kids
Yeah,
would,
and it essentially we were entertainers.
Yeah.
You had to have an identity for people to cheer for. I was talking to somebody the other day about the fact that now you practically have to have a publicity manager, somebody that can get you into Instagram and Facebook and Let's Run and Twitter and make sure that you're being talked about. Because if you don't, then your sponsor's not going to be happy. It's a completely different world than it was when we were competing.
social,
yeah, we're trying to figure out how to set up a Zoom call.
Yeah, I mean, we how to make Zoom work. So us
we
poor
can't
old
provide
guys,
any answers,
with
I
the
don't
help
think.
of Amy, we're having trouble getting Zoom to work. I think we should probably
Exactly.
start wrapping this up.
We needed some junior high kid to come and
Yeah,
help
we
us
do.
out
We need to get somebody that's young to kind of manage
Yeah.
this stuff for us.
Exactly.
But it doesn't seem to have hurt the growth of our sport and the enjoyment of our sport and the visibility of our sport. It's still pretty high. It's very, very high in a lot of ways. I think, having the trials at Disney, I heard someone say a long time ago that they thought Disney was interested in the Olympic Games. And I wouldn't be surprised if that were true, with Disney owning ESPN and them covering cross country. I think our sport has a bright future, no matter where your ranking is, and maybe, it's maybe it's can sea-level born athletes, some sea-level born athletes seem to be able to compete with altitude born athletes more effectively than others. But I think it's true, everyone's at altitude today. And that's really amazing. I never trained at altitude. Don, did you ever do that?
I never did. I think at the time that I should have done that, I had too many other things going on and just couldn't do that. But I would have had to go to someplace and I don't know.
Boulder.
Yeah,
Well,
Boulder.
when Don was Boulder wasn't really a factor yet when Don was in his prime. I mean, I know Frank and Galloway and Bachelor went to Vail. But it was not really on the map that much. It was part of it. I think Frank was having lived in New Mexico at altitude for a bit. I think that was what he just wanted to go someplace nice to train, and I think at the altitude part of it was just sort of a side effect.
Was it him or was it Bachelor or Galloway that said, let's go to altitude? Because
No, it
that
was
seemed to
Frank.
change everything.
They went with Frank. Bachelor was the one that made up the workouts. Galloway was just hanging on for dear life, basically.
Yeah, of course. Those guys are pretty darn good.
Yeah, they did some unbelievable runs.
Ron, did you train at altitude at all?
No. Lived in Houston, trained there at sea level, and then Eugene.
And
So
I all of my good years were Atlanta. Atlanta.
and
because
Bill,
of
you
the
went to
heat, maybe.
Arizona. You went to Arizona to train, right?
I went
In the
to-
winter.
Yeah, just Phoenix to get out of the winter, the New England winter. But it's interesting, of course, I've heard that the poor man's altitude is heat and humidity, which Ron, you trained it, Benji, you trained it,
Yeah.
and I trained it. I'm from Hartford, Connecticut, which is a pretty hot and humid summer city.
Summer, yeah.
And what's your excuse? Was it just those hills?
Well, he was very talented is what his excuse was.
And Stanford has produced so many high-level track and field athletes, distance runners from Ryan Hall, Sarah Hall, and going back for years and years.
Let's not forget CC Hop.
What's-
Duncan McDonald, Tony
Duncan.
Sandoval.
That's right.
I don't think I'm even in the top three of Stanford marathoners. I'm probably around 7th or 8th. I don't know.
Well, I'm 9th or 10th for Boulder County in the marathon.
So it goes.
So it goes.
Let's keep our eye on that project, you know, about your medal, Frank's medal,
Oh, yeah.
moving up to 39th place. But I'm serious, of course.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Frank has probably got the most influence.
I'll talk with Frank, you know, and see what's going on. As much as
Yeah.
I'll be
Yeah,
seeing him in
that's-
Boston.
That's something that should be taken care of.